Hello YouTube! My name is Scott and welcome to another episode of Opinions No One Cares About. A video series that goes nowhere fast and looks damn good doing it. Let's keep it fun and light this time around, shall we? I'm going to talk about death. And drugs. Well, not so much drugs as one chemical in particular. This is called dimethyltryptamine, or DMT for short. It's one of the most powerful psychedelics in the world, and believe it or not, our brains produce it. Now, it's theorized that DMT is responsible for what people throughout the ages have termed religious or near-death experiences. There was a scientific study done that showed an increase in DMT in rats that were put into cardiac arrest. So just to clarify, scientists gave rats heart attacks to see if their brains would produce higher levels of psychedelic drugs. Science is both weird and awesome sometimes. Anyway, I specifically looked this up because I remembered hearing things like this before. Something about your brain shutting down as it dies, random neurons firing off for the last time, that oft-repeated line about your life flashing before your eyes. And my thoughts turned to this young man, Marty McFly. Why, you ask? Because we're talking about science. Do you remember this? Scientifically speaking, even an amplifier that size wouldn't be able to produce a shockwave like the kind that blasted Marty across the room. Significant sound waves, sure, but they wouldn't have that effect. But even assuming Doc Brown souped it up so that it could do that, although I have no idea why, Marty standing that close to the amp and getting hit by a shockwave powerful enough to throw him 20 feet away would also have the problematic side effect of, rupturing his eardrums and liquefying his internal organs. So, picture it. Marty McFly lying prone on the floor of Doc's home/lab, blood running out both his ears. You know what, imagine it however you want. The point is, he's dying. And if that study from earlier is to be believed, then as his brain is shutting down, it's also producing a powerful psychotropic. Which leads to my theory. As Marty's dying, he's hallucinating the entire Back to the Future trilogy. I know, I sound like I'm the one on psychedelic drugs. But bear with me here. Suppose that Marty knows his time has come. I don't know about you guys, but when I do something stupid and irreversible, which is pretty often now that I think about it, I think, oh, I wish I could go back in time and change that. Marty, lying dead on the floor...
Look who knows so much, huh? Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
Sorry. Marty, lying mostly dead on the floor, is probably wishing he had a time machine so he could go back and not play that chord. And that, coupled with the fact that his best friend is a scientist, could very well be leading him to imagine a scenario where he survived the amp exploding and his life is proceeding as normal. Just imagine it as if it were a scenario being played out by a dying brain on drugs. It starts off normal enough before they take effect. Marty's late for school, and of course gets caught by Mr. Strickland. He hangs out with his girlfriend. He has dinner with his family. Next thing you know, he's in a parking lot in the middle of the night, while his best friend shows him his nuclear-powered time machine, and then Libyan terrorists show up. And then Marty travels to the past and finds his parents, which is most likely the effect of the drugs, coupled with the fact that he's probably thinking of his family as he dies. This also explains anachronisms like the movie Cattle Queen of Montana playing at the theater a full year after it debuted in November of 1954, the Baines family watching this episode of The Honeymooners, which wouldn't premiere in real life until about a month after they saw it, and Marty rocking out at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance with a model of guitar that wouldn't be developed for another 3 years. And did you notice how influential he is? Goldie Wilson is mayor of Hill Valley when Marty's alive, so in the past, he makes it happen.
One day I'm gonna be somebody. That's right, he's gonna be mayor. Yeah, mayor. Man, Goldie Wilson. Like the sound of that.
He loves skateboarding, so there he is inventing it. And as we saw, he loves rock and roll, which is why his drugged-up death spiral includes this.
Jump! Jump! It's Marvin! Your cousin, Marvin Berry! You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this!
He even names himself.
Marty. such a nice name.
And then there's Doc Brown, the man Marty assumes could invent time travel because he's a brilliant scientist. But Marty doesn't get him quite right. I mean, the real Doc Brown would never make this mistake.
21 gigawatts of electricity. 21 gigawatts!
And Marty keeps him alive, whether he's being murdered by terrorists or having the previously mentioned 1.21 gigawatts flowing through him. Marty is keeping Doc alive in his mind as the one man who could save him, which is how Doc gets him back to Doc's future, Marty's present. But in real life, Marty's brain is slowly shutting down and things are getting crazier. Which is why the first movie ends with Doc showing up dressed weirdly, with a flying car that runs on garbage?
Wait a minute, what are you doing, Doc? I need fuel.
So the second movie begins with Doc, Marty, and Jennifer traveling to the year 2015. Or the year 2015 as imagined by a dying teenager in the 80s. This explains why it looks so different from the real 2015 that we all lived through a few years back. With the flying cars, shoes with power laces, and of course, the hoverboard. And I think Marty realizes at this point that things are not going well for him. We get that line in the first movie about how he doesn't think he could handle that kind of rejection. And then in the future, instead of being a huge rock star, he's a failed businessman who can't even play the guitar anymore because he broke his hand. And then just to make things even worse, his mind whips up a plot that twists his entire present into a dystopia, forcing him to travel to the past again, not only to fix it, but because he still wants to go back to before he played that chord. A lot of the plot of the movie at this point revolves around Biff, and I'm going to explain his part in this whole thing a little bit later, so let me skip ahead a bit. Well, let me skip ahead a bunch. Doc and Marty save the day, of course, because dying hallucination, and Marty's just not ready to go yet. But what happens next seems to stem from this one line from Back to the Future 2.
My only regret is that I'll never get a chance to visit my favorite historical era, the Old West.
So it seems to me that Marty's dying neurons latched onto this particular line and sent Doc even further into the past to both give his friend the opportunity that he wanted and continue regressing in an attempt to save his own life, which is how we wound up with Back to the Future 3. I feel like this movie is Marty painting Doc in the best possible light. He's much less of a broad, wacky character in this one, much more grounded. And I think that's because Marty, edging ever closer to death, is latching onto Doc Brown, the scientist, as the one man who could possibly save him. So Doc is happy, living out his dream of being a blacksmith in the Old West. He even finds love with a character that Marty obviously remembered from school.
Doc, Clayton Ravine was named after a teacher. They say she fell in there 100 years ago.
100 years ago? That's this year.
Every kid in school knows that story because we all have teachers we like to see fall into the ravine.
But again, dying hallucination, which is why Marty travels back in time again, dressed like that. He gets to be a cowboy, and uses a 21st century hoverboard to save Doc and Clara, even as a locomotive pushes a car across a bridge that hasn't been completed yet. This point near the end of the movie, however, seems to be where Marty has finally accepted his fate. Because he's barely back to his present when the time machine, the one thing that would let him go back and stop himself from making that huge mistake, is destroyed. But even with that out of the picture, things are okay. His family is still the new and improved model from the first movie. He doesn't break his hand, and Doc is back, with a newer, cooler-looking time machine, and a family. I imagine that this point, back in the real world on the floor of Doc's lab, is when Marty's finally ready to let go. Maybe he even managed a small smile as his brain finally shut down. Look, you can call me crazy all you want. Many have. And maybe dying hallucination is too convenient an excuse to explain the movies. But you know what it might explain? Their repetitive nature. Because in each movie, Marty does two things. Run into a member of his family, and change history. And it makes sense that he'd be thinking of his family as he lay dying, while also wishing he could go back and change the past. And if that doesn't work for you, the hallucinatory nature of this dream would also explain why he introduced his parents to each other when they were teenagers, but they don't remember it. Or the fact that he looks oddly like a guy they knew for like a week back in high school, who coincidentally he is also named after. Or, how about the fact that with the exception of George, every male member of Marty's family looks like him? And every female member, besides his sister, looks like his mom. Or him again? Were the future McFly kids supposed to be twins? I honestly don't know. And this is where I'm going to circle it back to Biff Tannen. Honestly, I think the real-life Biff behaved exactly the same as he did at the beginning of the first movie, having George completely under his thumb and being an attempted rapist. And it's been a long-running thing, so long that Marty's been a witness to it. So it comes as no surprise to me that this last dying utterance of his brain has Biff behaving exactly the same way in high school, right down to the attempted rape of Lorraine. But, being the good son that he is, Marty mentally rewrites it so that George comes out ahead, and his whole family's better off because of it. And if you recall, at the beginning of the movie, Biff is George's supervisor at wherever they work. And even though George is even-tempered and deferential to Biff, even when he's acting like this, he's not respectful. He doesn't call him Sir or Mr. Tannen, but cut to the end, and...
Mr. McFly! Mr. McFly just arrived!
He's calling him Mr. McFly? This goes way beyond the character change one would expect after being punched once. Either George used those fists many more times, or none of this is real and his dying son is going into hallucinogenic overkill. Which would explain why the other incarnations of the Tannen family, who both look like Biff because Marty has no other frame of reference, get arrested. Biff was a terrible person, so Marty basically neuters him, then makes the rest of his family criminals. And at Marty's lowest point, in Back to the Future 2, where everything's going wrong, is where he dreams up the worst possible version of Biff Tannen. A powerful, corrupt, womanizing billionaire who slaps his name on everything and seems to want nothing more than to run America into the ground. Why does that seem familiar all of a sudden? And this version of Biff actually gets it the worst, because he doesn't just lose, Marty straight up erases him from existence. He does not like Biff Tannen. And this is just speculation on my part, but I think his opinion of the guy was so low, after a lifetime of seeing him dominate his dad, that he probably imagined standing up to Biff many times and telling him, in one way or another, to eat. Hence... So, I think that covers every... Oh, wait.
Don't worry.
Yeah, that. If everything else I said is true, and even if it's not, I don't have an explanation for that one. At this point, all I can hope for is that my little theory here blew your mind. Although not as hard as that ant blew Marty's, am I right? Too soon? Hey everybody, thanks for sticking around until the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If so, you know all the usual YouTube stuff. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified the next time I put up a video. These episodes I usually try to do every other Friday, but there is some other stuff on my channel, so go check that out too. And until next time, I have been Scott, and this has been Opinions No One Cares About. Everyone has opinions. This one was mine.